All right, boys, let's get this show on the road. Let's get started with SMT1.
What the heck? What about MT?
What do you mean empty? You mean your head?
MT, which is Megami Tensei, which came out before SMT?
That's not Mainline.
Yes, it is. SMT is a reboot of Megami Tensei, which was based off of Digital Devil Story.
Wait, aren't Digital Devil Saga PS2 games?
No, Sleepy Joe, I said Digital Devil Story. They're science fiction novels made by Aya Nishitani. So the original games were actually based very loosely off of books.
You know, that sounds familiar. Wasn't that in a Marsh video?
Yeah, Trump, check out Marsh. He did a retrospective on that. I may be sleepy, but even I'm not that sleepy to ignore a good Megaten creator like that.
I've seen Marsh's videos. They're pretty good, but can we rank the two Megami Tensei games now?
Is Persona 3 a Megumi Tensei game?
No, Sleepy Joe.
But the cover of Persona 3 says Shin Megumi Tensei on top.
No, that was a result of the Western localization. It's not actually a Megaten game. I don't know, we're going to be here all day if we're including so many games. How about we just stick with SMT for now and not the original Megami Tensei games?
Fine, but you're missing out the origins of the franchise. You're also missing out on other great spin-offs like Devil Summoner, Soul Hackers, Meijin Tensei, Devil Children, and many, many more.
You know, I love filibusters more than anybody else, but we have to set limits somewhere. Talk is usually cheap, but it's not cheap for AI-generated voices, so let's move on. Also, many of these games have different versions, so let's set the fan translation versions as the basis for our tier list. For officially localized games, let's use the latest remasters of the game if there are multiple versions.
Sounds fair.
Okay, we start with SMT1. Let's use the SNES fan translation for this tier list, which had existed for a while. I know there are fan translations for the GBA and even the PS1 versions of the game now, but let's use the SNES fan translation as our basis. We can talk about the other versions too, but let's try to rank using the SNES version mostly.
Well, I think it should be ranked in the middle. This isn't exactly the original SMT game. They made the two Megami Tensei games before it, so they had time to refine the SMT formula. Despite that, it still has many gameplay flaws from a balancing perspective, but it's a fun experience and worth a playthrough. The only real issue with SMT1 is that the neutral route beats all of the other routes because you fight all of the final bosses on that route and become very over-leveled. I'd recommend you to check out other routes in the game tool, like in one of the other routes, you can actually revive the protagonist's mom.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. The game is very biased towards the neutral route. Speaking about the gameplay, some demons are only able to be recruited or fused if you're of a certain alignment, so you may need to be of chaos alignment to use certain chaos demons. There are many tricks you can use to change your alignment during the game, or you can search for a guide to see what dialogue choices you should do. But at the same, it's such a lack of quality of life. Changing your alignment can get grindy at times because you can change your alignment by defeating certain types of enemies. You can also grind money to change your alignment.
It was neat to see the different factions for the different alignments. Depending on your alignment, you'd be allowed or not allowed to use certain healing facilities, for example. It's a neat idea, but from a gameplay perspective can be annoying for the player. Although the game is old, it still had somewhat decent roots. I mean, the law hero dies because he takes a bullet for you and becomes resurrected and hypnotized by the law group, and the chaos hero goes crazy and fuses himself and becomes a sick-looking ninja demon.
So the original SMT is that good? I only started from Nocturne onwards.
Well, it's very rough around the edges, but it is fun if you're playing it with an open mind. Playing through SMT1 makes you realize that the more modern SMTs, such as SMT4, pays a lot of homage to the original title, from soundtracks to the way alignment representatives are handled.
I'll tell you, oh bummer, what really is terrible is that the gameplay is not balanced well, so you might as well abuse its mechanics to give yourself an easier time, especially since the encounter rate is higher in these older titles, and there's random encounters as you traverse along the dungeons. There are certain bullets you can equip that break the game very easily too, such as ailment bullets. Your main character cannot use spells, it's only your demons, and if you have a human alignment partner on your side, that can. This means that your builds are more limited compared to modern SMT titles, and magic or intelligence is a useless stat.
But that's a trap too. See, in old games, you don't necessarily have a magic defense or resistance stat, so putting stats into intelligence, even for a physical character, could be useful to reduce incoming magic damage. Not just that, but increasing intelligence can actually help increase the odds of recruiting demons. So that's why you had such a hard time recruiting demons, because you neglected that stat. That's not the game's fault.
I mean, sure, but one thing I really hate about SMT1 is that the game is old and glitchy, so make many backup saves because you might see random game-breaking bugs such as a door you need to get through being permanently shut.
To be fair, it's the SNES version that was very buggy. You don't need to worry too much on the GBA and PSX version, so we shouldn't be too harsh on the game on that aspect. Not just that, we played a fan localization of SMT1. It may be possible that the translation patch itself was making the game run worse. I mean, sure, SMT1 was programmed in the old days and probably has spaghetti code like Japanese Pokemon Red and Green, but you can't be too harsh. It's a very old game.
You know, I did like the side quests in SMT1.
Yeah, the endgame armors were fun to collect. The endgame overworld gets flooded, and you can find equipment pieces scattered across the world in many optional dungeons. It's a lot of fun because your overworld vehicle is a squid.
No, I saw Marsh's playthrough of SMT1, and that was an octopus.
Actually, Sleepy Joe, it was a kraken.
Gentlemen, please. My point is that exploring the endgame before the final bosses is really fun. When you collect the equipment pieces, you can also find Masakado and craft the most powerful sword in the game. The overworld theme after Truman, Thorman launches a nuclear missile, is so sad, but it also sounds very hopeful at the same time. It's genuinely one of the best overworld themes I've ever heard.
See, you like SMT1 too.
Yeah, I do, surprisingly. Let's put it in B tier next, SMT2 on the SNES.
SMT2 is a direct sequel to SMT1 and takes place about 50 years after its events on the neutral route. Many will argue that you don't have to play SMT1, but I'd say you should play it anyways if you're exploring these older titles.
But the protagonist from SMT1 is found dead in a cave in SMT2.
Well, that's the best part. See, society falls apart after SMT1, and it's basically a post-apocalyptic wasteland not too dissimilar to what you'd see in Mad Max.
The soundtrack in SMT2 is phenomenal, especially the first city in the game.
Yeah, the Valhalla theme is a real banger.
SMT2 should be ranked higher than 1. Compared to SMT1, this sequel has a lot of gameplay improvements, more demon variety, and the balancing issues are now addressed, such as bosses now being immune to ailments. The game is still generally on the easier side once you learn what you're doing, of course.
That's a fair point, but the gameplay does suffer. There's more areas, and the areas are much bigger, but I really disliked all the backtracking.
But in the Let's Play I watched, there were teleporters.
Yes, there are many teleporters in the game, but they placed the teleporters in really bad locations. They made it such that you need to go through entire dungeons to get to and away from the teleporters. They put a lot of teleporters deep in dungeons and not in convenient places at all. If I had to guess, maybe the developers wanted to purposely pad out the gameplay length because the rental market was the way to make money back then.
Actually, Obama video game rentals was and is still illegal in Japan, where the game was made and released. So that theory of yours makes no sense.
Really? Huh. I guess the video game developers know how to lobby the Japanese Diet to pass favorable laws for them.
Yeah, I think.
Well, anyways, if you sum the amount of time spent backtracking, it really adds up to many hours. And it was not a problem at all in SMT1, so it baffles me why they had such an obtuse overworld design in SMT2.
I surprisingly do agree with you. The backtracking is bad in SMT2, but otherwise it's a very decent game, and there is a lot more story and presentation in this title. The first SMT game feels like Nocturne because the world is pretty barren early on. There are a lot of nice plot twists in this game as well. There's a lot more characters and dialogue compared to the original SMT. This game, however, has a lot more NPCs, such as buildings that are essentially cities full of NPCs, and this title has far more recruitable demons, leading to more fusion possibilities. Chris the Car is one of my favorite demons.
Wait, you can recruit a car demon in SMT2?
Yeah, Sleepy Joe, you should have played SMT2.
But I watched a Let's Play of the game.
Sure, but maybe the video you watched didn't recruit Chris the Car. You need to play it yourself, Joe. You know, the routes are handled far better than the former game, and they each have their nuance. You do indeed have a lot of detail and dialogue from all the major characters. The only disappointment I had was there is the same final boss on all the routes. So you have to make a contrived reason to fight them because the routes are different, yet somehow you always see the same villain. Apparently, the later remasters of the game, namely SMT2 on the PS1, fixes this. They change the final bosses depending on your route, and you can fight Metatron.
So true, Obama. I'm surprised you knew that too.
What the heck? Metatron was introduced in Nocturne Maniacs in Japan?
Oh, Sleepy Joe, you think you're so smart for knowing the difference between the vanilla and Maniacs versions of Nocturne in Japan? Listen, I'm like 10 steps ahead of you. You're 100 years too young to face me, even though you look like you're 100 years older than me.
Hey man, lay off, please.
Yeah, so Metatron was actually introduced in the remaster of SMT2 on the PS1, not in Nocturne, and he's the final boss on only the neutral and chaos routes, and the story makes much more sense as a result. You'll never find footage of it unless you type in the Japanese name of SMT into YouTube, because everyone in the West shows off their footage of fighting Metatron in Nocturne or in SMT5. It's tough to find footage of the Fiends in the remasters of SMT1 and 2.
So, I mean, SMT2 has some improvements, but it has some missteps too. I don't think it should be ranked higher than SMT1. Let's settle on B tier. Now for SMT if...
If what?
No, I'm talking about the game SMT if...
SMT if what?
Hey, Sleepy Joe, there's a game called SMT if, didn't you know?
What? I thought it was SMT1, then 2, then Nocturne, as if some kind of spin-off?
Sorry, Joe. SMT if is mainline. This is not up for debate. The gameplay is definitely a direct sequel to SMT2. Other games like Devil Summoner on the Sega Saturn made a lot more differences and was clearly going in a different direction and a spin-off. If is a common ancestor to both Devil Summoner and Persona 1, but it's still mainline.
Thank you.
So why is it called if?
It's called if because it's meant to be a what-if scenario if SMT 1 and 2 didn't occur. If you're from the UK, you may recognize that they copied the movie If, which has the logo a very similar style with the ellipsis. I've watched the movie because I was curious why the developers would name an SMT game after that movie. And aside from being set in a school setting, the plots between the movie and this game are not remotely similar at all. Maybe it's just loosely inspired from the movie. The thing is with SMT, if is that it's an extremely experimental game.
It's also a precursor to the Persona series because the female protagonist, Tamaki, is canon and appears in the earlier Persona games.
Yeah, that was weird. Apparently, one of the Japanese developers self-inserted himself as a game character who dated Tamaki.
Yeah, that was odd.
Anyways, SMT. If is also considered a precursor to Persona because of it being set in a school environment, but it doesn't have a schedule, social stats, or time management. But it does have guardian deities, which are very similar to how characters have personas in the Persona series. Each time you battle, you have a guardian bar that will increase, which works like an experience bar. The game will continue after your protagonist dies, and your guardian will get better or worse. If the guardian bar was filled enough, you'll get a better guardian deity when you die. But if the guardian bar did not fill enough and you die, then you'll get a worse guardian spirit.
Yeah, the guardian system was a very interesting and even revolutionary concept. The mentality behind this is to not let players spam dying to get better guardians. But at the same time, if you're struggling and dying many times in the game, you're just going to keep getting stomped down even more and getting worse guardians. They should have had a give the squeaky tire the oil kind of mentality instead, in my opinion. I've been reading mechanics regarding this. There is contention about this that say, generally, you most likely won't get a worse guardian spirit. A lot of information about the mechanics of this game is niche. I scoured through many old Japanese forums and guidebooks for my playthrough.
Obama, you actually scour through old Japanese media to play this weird old game?
Of course, Joe. You know what they call me in Japan? They call me Barack Okama. Anyways, you don't customize these guardians directly because they're in the status menus you can only view, but they do give your partner character skills. Your partner will inherit spells, not skills, though. Again, it's not implemented well because it will overwrite your character's skills randomly. I never got the option to choose the spells I wanted, meaning you don't have the ability to make a build you want.
But what happens if you never die in the game? Then won't your guardian never level up?
See, that's the thing, Sleepy Joe. If you don't die and reach the world of jealousy, the third nomos in the Expanse, you can find an NPC who will give you the most powerful sword in the game that can hit enemies 8 times. But at the same time, not dying means you can't upgrade your guardian either, and you'll need to keep reloading whenever you die, so there's a trade-off.
True that. I struggled a lot because I kept reloading every time I died, and then I barely had any skills or good equipment, so it's up to you if you want to go for the sword or not. I recommend actually dying quickly after getting the sword so you can get some skills at least. You can't get it in Charlie's route because you don't visit that area that provides the sword in that route. You can find it on Akira's route normally if the protagonist or Akira have over 25 vitality.
What the heck is Akira's root?
I'll explain more about the roots soon. Just let me say this first. SMT, if is very janky because of these new gameplay mechanics. It's not glitchy, but it is full of odd game design decisions. If you played Fire Emblem, SMT, if is basically the Thracia 776 of the SMT family. I know Joe will not understand the reference, but Thracia 776 is a game from the Fire Emblem franchise, also on the SNES, that introduced many experimental gameplay mechanics.
You know, Obama, I get what you're saying. It's true, SMT. If is very experimental and very weird in its gameplay, and later SMT games have many improvements. The developers have even publicly stated that they regret making SMT, if hard and unapproachable for newcomers, and tried to make later installments, such as Devil Summoner and the Kyoyaku Megami Tensei, more easy with more quality of life improvements.
But Megami Tensei was the first two games you said?
No, Sleepy Joe, Kyoyaku Megami Tensei is a remaster of the first two games released after SMT, if was released. Megami Tensei was originally released on the NES, whereas Kyoyaku Megami Tensei is the remastered collection of games with new demons, graphics, and other quality of life enhancements.
If you want to play SMT if and have an easy time, you should honestly consult the Japanese guides. Don't be fooled, this game looks just like SMT 1 and 2 from a visual standpoint, but it actually plays very differently, and it is actually a hard game if you're not prepared, especially compared to SMT 1 and 2, which were moderately easy games. You can't break the game like the old games anymore, which is a welcome change.
You know one thing I do love, though? You can choose your protagonist's gender. The gender may affect some dialogue, but doesn't change the overall plot or roots.
True, being able to choose your protagonist's gender is certainly a welcoming change, but it's not implemented perfectly. Your gender does affect the gameplay, and you can only equip certain weapons and armors depending on this. Weapons and armors don't necessarily have male and female counterparts for every kind, and some dungeons may end up having more male weapons than female weapons, for instance, and vice versa. The treasure chests are not random, and the shops also have fixed sets of equipment too, and some dungeons on some routes may be full of only male equipment and no female equipment and vice versa. Another downside is that the female protagonist will have less health points too. Due to the way the game is programmed, your human partner has their health points relative to yours, so all your companions have less health too than if you had chosen a male protagonist.
I do like the roots, but I don't like how the roots were implemented from a gameplay perspective. SMT. If has roots done very differently than SMT 1 or 2. When you start the game early on, you will choose one of 4 characters to explore the school with, which will immediately determine your entire route for the game. One of these characters is locked to New Game Plus, so it's really choosing one of 3 characters as your partner if you're in a fresh new game. It's tricky because one of these root characters will immediately approach you directly and offer to help. Naturally, you'll want to accept, but then you'll be permanently locked with her for the entire game if you do this. So, consult a guide on the routes.
I agree completely with you on that point.
Each of these routes has a few differences and their own unique dungeon as well as alternative endings, but Reiko's route is the one you probably want to choose because it has more detail compared to the other characters' routes, such as discovering the antagonist's backstory, which is not done in the other routes, and an extra dungeon and extra final boss. Most people playing the game blindly wouldn't do this, though, because you need to purposely reject the other route companions, Yumi and Charlie, first. But why would a player reject a character offering them help? It's very old-school game design.
I agree. But the new game exclusive route, done with the companion Akira, is probably one of my favorite routes in all of SMT. It has a completely unique dungeon, and the story is completely different, whereas Reiko, Yumi, and Charlie have mostly the same content, except Reiko has the antagonist's backstory with an extra dungeon at the end. Akira's route even has unique bosses, many of which are more challenging than the main story bosses in the other routes and tests your mastery of the game. It's fair because it's a new game plus route, so if you were good enough to beat the game, you should be good enough to tackle his route as well. I rarely ever see this done in JRPGs. The only thing that comes close is Soul Nomad's evil demon path route, which completely changes its story to be darker. It's extremely worth it to do a second playthrough to complete Akira's route because it's just so fascinating. The bosses will all spam the most powerful spells, and you need to have either protective armor to make those spells immune, or the Tetraja spell with demon partner faster than the boss. It's still fair, though, because you can make builds to counter these bosses. Akira's route is like if SMT4, Apocalypse's Anarchy route, was its own game instead. Unlike SMT 1 and 2, though, there aren't many safe areas without encounters, and although the school is initially safe, most of the other places in the expanse you go to will have encounters in its shops, so you really always need to be on guard.
Yeah, but that's fair. That's the dungeon. The school is a pretty nice hub area to return to between your excursions, and the reoccurring NPCs you can talk to and learn more about is actually nice and relaxing. The school is meant to be the only safe place free of encounters, not the demon towns, at least until the school gets infested with demons near the end. I think most people would rush through the game's dungeons, but there's a surprising amount of detail in the school. Oh, bummer. Let me give you some tips. You need to abuse the casino, whether it be through saving the game or cheating through using save states.
Why would I want to cheat to beat the game? If I paid for the game, I want to experience it normally.
Hey, Sleepy Joe, don't look at me like that. We had Game Shark and Action Replay for games back then, and the developers fully made the game with that in mind. The casino is very abusable in older SMT games too, and SMT if is no exception.
My only big criticism is that you only get most interaction with the supporting character you choose and the villain. And there's no proper cast of characters like in old games unless you factor in all the school NPCs. As well, the game focuses more on dungeon crawling and has significantly less story compared to the original two SMTs, especially since you're confined in a school area and the expanse mostly has dungeons with just a few NPCs sprinkled here and there. But that can be a benefit depending on what you're looking for. I'm ranking this under C tier because the developers took too much risk with this game. I know it was a different era for SNES games, but it's so different and annoying. Now let's rank Nocturne.
Finally!
Specifically, we're ranking the remastered version of Nocturne. The remastered version isn't too different, but it does have some voice acting, a retranslation of the script to make the dialogue flow better, and most importantly, the ability to choose which skills are inherited on fused demons.
We're skipping SMT9?
Wait, I thought the last game was SMT5. How is there an SMT9?
Well, to be honest, let's just skip SMT9. It has no English fan translation, and it was one of the worst games in the franchise. Nocturne is the game most English speakers played this as their first SMT game. I'd really recommend getting the HD version because it has skill inheritance where you can choose which demon skills to inherit when you fuse them. In the original PS2 version, you had to keep refreshing the fusion screen until you got the skills you wanted. And in some cases, this could take hours just to inherit something as simple as 3 skills. The HD version also has voice acting, an easy difficulty setting made just for you, Joe. A difficulty can be changed any time rather than being only one selection at the beginning, and you can play the Chronicle version of the game as well. There's 2 types of routes you can choose in the remaster, Maniacs or Chronicle. Basically, the PS2 version is the Maniacs version of the game and has Dante from the Devil May Cry series as a side character, whereas the Nocturne HD versions includes the original game without additions, the Maniacs version with Dante, and the Chronicle version has Raidu from Devil Summoner as a side character. It sounds confusing, but please let me explain. The reason for this is because when the original game or vanilla version was released in Japan, it didn't do well, so they added a lot of content such as the Fiends and Dante and branded it as the Maniacs version of Nocturne and then sold it in Japan. They then translated the Maniacs version of the game to English for sales overseas, but left out the Maniacs name. That's the version of Nocturne the West received. Atlas then made another version of the game called Chronicle that came with SMT Devil Summoner, Raido 2, and has the character Raido instead of Dante that they sold in Japan. Atlas took all these different versions and retranslated the entire script for sale as Nocturne HD.
Wait, what are you talking about? I didn't get Fiends or Dante from the Devil May Cry franchise in my game?
Look, Joe, it's not that complex. The main story is always the same, but depending on whether you choose Maniacs or Chronicle will determine if you encounter Dante or Raidu as a side character in your playthrough. Don't choose the original game that's not Maniacs or Chronicle because you'll miss out on a lot of amazing content. Make sure you choose Maniacs or Chronicle.
Oh man, I think I played the wrong version of the game.
Chronicle is included in Nocturne HD, but Maniacs is unfortunately paid DLC. For me, it was good, though. I played the original PS2 version with Dante and recently played Nocturne HD with Raidu, so I experienced both versions of the game. They're just side characters. They don't interfere with the plot, though you can recruit them as if they were a unique demon. You can also play the original version of the game without these characters, but it isn't recommended. It excludes other features such as the Fiend boss fights and the dungeon that was added in as part of the new versions, the Labyrinth of Amala.
See that, Sleepy Joe? You missed out on like half the game.
Hey, be quiet, please, man.
Also, if you're worried, the appearance of Dante or Raidu will not spoil either the Devil May Cry or the Devil Summoner, Raidu franchises. I played Devil May Cry 2, a terrible game sadly, before playing Nocturne on the PS2, and it actually helped me solve a riddle that Dante asked in Nocturne, but you can always Google the answer too. It's multiple choice, so you can always just guess. I do enjoy Dante's DMC2 design too, even if it comes from a bad game. Too bad we'll never see Lucia, an amazing character in DMC2, forever trapped in a horrible Devil May Cry game.
Yeah, poor Lucia. She was one of the goat girls in Devil May Cry. Anyways, I like Nocturne because it's a really great starting point because it's very easily approachable. You have 3D demons in the battles and the maps are in 3D, though you do have random encounters and it can be high rate at times, so fuse a demon with a stoma.
I personally didn't like some of the dungeons. The game is full of pitfalls and teleporter mazes everywhere.
No, Obama, you're the reason we have no fun dungeons in Megaten anymore. The dungeons can be difficult and have gimmicks, but they're definitely learnable if you're paying attention. The Kabukicho prison is so interesting, and it's not a teleporter maze. In that dungeon, you use mirrors to flip the floor back and forth, and you're supposed to use the camera to see if there's a root on the ceiling.
But what about that yoga park? There were fairies teleporting me everywhere.
The Yoyogi Park construction area is also really great. You use lookout towers to spot where the fairies are, and the fairies swap spots back and forth after teleporting you as well, so you manipulate where they are.
Yeah, that dungeon is fair. But look at the final dungeon in Nocturne. It's a giant maze full of teleporters, and there's no hints to indicate where to go at some points.
All right, I'll give you that. That dungeon is pretty much bad. You know, Bay Gaming made some really great Nocturne walkthroughs. He edited out the encounters in his videos and shows you how to get all the treasures.
Yeah, thank God for Bay Gaming. He makes the best videos.
I mean, Nocturne is really fun, but they really messed up magic builds. The game isn't perfect at all, and you make a physical character build due to the best skills being physical skills. The true demon final boss automatically resists every element, and there's a passive skill called Pierce that bypasses this, but it only works for physical skills. There's also a skill called Focus that multiplies your physical attacks by 1.5 times, but there's no concentrate skill for multiplying magic damage.
But that's not so much extra damage. Does that really matter that much?
Yes, Sleepy Joe, because critical attacks work off of that 1.5 times damage, making it do substantially more damage. You do that with a Freekugel and you're set to beat any boss easily.
Ah, man, I actually overwrote Freykugel and Focus with other skills.
One thing I really hated about Nocturne is that you also need to be careful when learning Magatama skills. Because if you remove a skill, you will never be able to get that skill again, meaning you can permanently screw up your character build for an entire playthrough if you unlearn the best skills. Interestingly, when you debug the game, there were many skills left out of the final release, such as the ability to relearn old skills and a spell that disarmed trapped treasures.
For people like you, Sleepy Joe, it's recommended you read some guides going in. Otherwise, this game is very fun, and you have multiple routes called reasons which are associated with the major characters in the game. It is an aspect of the game I really liked, having multiple differing routes based on different views the character has, and it's not limited to a linear law chaos alignment used in previous games.
But the world is all dead in Nocturne and there's no NPCs.
True, but that's meant to be the case. It is an apocalyptic world. There isn't many NPCs, but there still are ghosts and demons to talk to. The world is meant to be depressing and feels very dead, which can be a pro or a con for you. If you want a really lively JRPG with cities full of people and cheery music, this isn't for you. Go play Final Fantasy instead, Joe. As for me, I really enjoyed the cryptic nature of the game.
The plot in Nocturne was really confusing. Like, the gameplay is fun, but I just don't get the story.
Well, there are even Labyrinth of Amala cutscenes that were added in from the original Japanese release to help explain the plot, too. The Labyrinth of Amala is probably one of my favorite dungeons in SMT and in JRPGs. It's very well designed and detailed.
But you can't even recruit the demons with Kamala.
Yeah, you can't because the game wasn't balanced around it. Remember, Vanilla Nocturne in Japan didn't have this optional dungeon, and the game was balancing around recruiting demons from the main story areas only.
The game has a lot of replayability because it has many reasons you can choose. But at the same time, only the very final cutscene cinematic changes. The endgame itself doesn't change very much, and they all recycle the same final dungeon and most of the final bosses. It's still extremely fun making the most powerful demons and doing bonus challenges called the Burial Chambers, where you refight old storyline bosses and beat them as quickly as possible. Honestly, the addition of the true demon ending is kind of like a golden ending, where everyone goes for it and thinks it's the best ending. Sure, it may be the canon ending, but I still think they put a lot of work in the original endings too, and nobody will ever experience the original endings again because of it. It's kind of like how in the neutral route in SMT 1 you fight more bosses. It's the same in Nocturne's true demon ending route.
The Demi-Fiend is such a fun protagonist. I mean, he's a blank slate like most Megaten protagonists, but he has such a great design and such a powerful presence. Despite its flaws, Nocturne does have really fun gameplay. Don't we all agree on that?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Okay, despite its flaws, let's rank Nocturne in S. Now for Strange Journey, specifically Strange Journey Redux.
Wait, I thought SMT4 came after Nocturne. Isn't Strange Journey a spinoff?
No, Sleepy Joe, all fans consider Strange Journey to be a mainline Megaten title.
You too, Obama?
Yeah, sorry, Sleepy Joe. Even though the game was made by the creators of Etrian Odyssey, and the dungeon design reflects that, and even though it doesn't take place in downtown Tokyo like the other Megaten games, it still has the same demons and law, neutral and chaos routes, and it even does it better than many of the other mainline Megaten titles.
Okay, man, I get it.
Anyways, the Redux version has many improvements over the original game, such as having a giant new optional dungeon, new bosses, a new major supporting character, and new endings.
I didn't play this one. What's it about?
To put it succinctly, Strange Journey really is a strange journey. It's almost as strange as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but not quite as strange as Baki or Beastars, though. It was originally made to be SMT4, but there were workplace politics at Atlas about whether it should be or not, and in the end it was decided not to be called SMT4 since it didn't take place in Tokyo. The atmosphere of the game is extremely different, taking place in Antarctica, where you're fighting to survive. The main cast are all adults in the military, whereas all other SMT games have civilian high school-aged adolescents as protagonists, so it's a really refreshing change of pace.
I agree with you for once, Obama. It has a very different tone compared to other SMT games, which is extremely refreshing. It is a very serious and depressing game when the plot gets going, and I felt myself completely immersed in its story. It felt like a constant struggle in a strange world full of demons, and you get to watch everything slowly break down in front of your eyes. Commander Gore is one of my favorite characters in the entire series.
Its dungeons, however, are like an actual dungeon crawler JRPG, and was made by the developers of Etrian Odyssey. The dungeons don't start off too bad, but they get genuinely grueling over time because I wasn't used to these style of dungeons at the time. You will want to consult online maps if you need help. Thankfully, the Redux version adds more apps for the protagonist that really help you out, especially the ability to save anywhere, which is reasonable for these lengthy, complicated dungeons.
Didn't know you were a save-scumming casual, Obama.
It's a portable game. You should be allowed to save everywhere. I take it with me while I'm in all the boring red tape meetings. Anyways, these dungeons are more difficult than SMT 1, 2, or even IFS dungeons. You'll see pitfalls, teleporter mazes, sliding on ice, etc. The new dungeon, the Womb of Grief, really challenges you and is very similar to Nocturne's Labyrinth of Amala. They're genuinely grueling.
Is it that bad?
Well, I don't completely disagree. Go look up the dungeons maps. The dungeons in Strange Journey are the most labyrinthine of any SMT title, but that can be a plus for people too, looking for a challenge compared to the mostly linear dungeons seen later in the franchise. Anyways, regarding the plot, it has a law-chaos alignment system, and although the dungeons are recycled between the routes, you get very different cutscenes depending on your route and different endgame bosses too. The alignment representatives also get a lot more screen time and were handled extremely well, even better than the alignment representatives in SMT4. You actually see a lot of character development with the alignment representatives, and you see them slowly become more and more deranged with their ideology.
Isn't it a 2D title?
That's right, Joe. This game has visual novel-style cutscenes that provide a lot of exposition to the player, as well as interactions between characters, and the Redux version has most of the dialogue lines voiced as well as additional character portraits. There's a lot of great side content as well, but it can be difficult to complete due to a lack of quest markers, so you'll have to consult guides online.
Yeah, of course you're going to complain about a lack of quest markers, huh, oh bummer? I won't lie, though, some of the side quests have pretty funny results. Do you remember that quest with Anthony?
How could I forget? Failure of a human.
Failure of a human?
Failure of a human.
You didn't play it, Sleepy Joe? You don't get to join in? Anyways, I don't recommend this as your starting entry into SMT, Joe, because the endgame bosses get extremely difficult and catch many newcomers off guard. Even when I had played the original Strange Journey and then playing Strange Journey Redux years later, I had even more trouble with the new final bosses. The game does have a password system where you can generate a password for your demons for others to use.
Yeah, I ended up just using Donald's demons to get through the new final bosses. It's really that challenging.
Hey, I want to play it soon. Can I borrow some demons from you too, Obama?
Sure, Joe.
Thanks, Obama.
Anyways, I'll give it A tier then. Now on to SMT 4.
Nice. I love this game. The dungeons are really simplified. You play as a samurai, and it has an excellent blend between a Mikado and Tokyo. The fake premise is really interesting, though it's somewhat long. Took me weeks to get past the Minotaur boss fight.
Yeah, that Minotaur boss in beginning is really tough for some reason. And it's too bad the developers switched back to 2D demons instead of 3D demons.
SMT4 gets a lot of flack for its issues, but I don't think its issues are that bad. The demon and battle system is now done with 2D sprites instead of 3D demons, and the game has limitations because it's now on a handheld console. Think of it as a follow-up to Strange Journey rather than Nocturne. As a result of the move to 2D, a lot of fans of Nocturne were disappointed with this title just by looking at it. It's a shame people think like this because the gameplay was improved significantly. The menus are all amazingly done, and from a gameplay perspective, it's far better than Nocturne was.
How can SMT4 possibly be better than Nocturne?
It has over 400 demons to fuse from because the demons are sprites, so they can put more demons in the game compared to Nocturne, where they had to fully model the demons to be 3D. The demon search feature is amazing and is leagues above Nocturne's simple fusion system.
That's actually a really excellent point. You can search for almost anything you want with the fusion calculator built in the game. You want a demon who is immune to an element? Want a demon with a certain skill? Want to only find new demons? It's endless.
Magic builds are now viable, and you can easily transfer skills to the protagonist from your demons back and forth without magatamas or missable skills. If you do this multiple times for the same spell or skill, it will be powered up and have a lower cost. You can break the game easily once you know what you're doing, but the level of customizability is amazing, especially compared to Nocturne, and you can't permanently mess up.
At the same time, the early game dungeon, Naraku, is very difficult, especially for newcomers such as Sleepy Joe.
Hey, lay off, man.
You really need to grind a bit early on and fuse some good demons. I've played most SMT games and its spin-offs, and none of the games, not even SMT 1 or 2, had such difficult introductory areas. The game really doesn't pull punches and doesn't have a customizable difficulty level. The smirk system was implemented in this game, but not in the best way. It's unbalanced, and sometimes you can get screwed due to bad RNG. With the Naraku Minotaur boss, it's possible to just die because the boss keeps getting smirks, criticals, and more turns.
Yeah, I guess that is true. The RNG is pretty bad in that fight, and smirk is unbalanced for you and the enemy too. You get either Jonathan or Walter in that boss fight. They will help you out by casting spells to the enemy, but sadly this is one of the drawbacks of the game, as you might end up with Walter, who casts spells an early boss absorbs, causing you to lose turns and heal the boss, and you're essentially getting punished for doing nothing wrong.
Have you seen Sir Lionheart? He has some amazing reactions to fighting the first boss.
Yeah, I did. Another one. DJ Khalid is the best.
Heck yeah. Anyways, once you figure out how to exploit the battle system through hitting enemies' weaknesses and buffing, debuffing, you can get through the early game. Once you're past that, the game becomes far more reasonable in terms of difficulty. Again, there's so many quality of life improvements. You can click a button and it shows you and the enemy's buffs and debuffs, unlike Nocturne.
Hey, Sleepy Joe, the dungeons are in 3D in SMT4 and are much easier than Nocturne's dungeons if you were stressed out about Nocturne's puzzle dungeons. One aspect I really love is that SMT4 pays homage to the old SMT games, especially the original Digital Devil story, Megami Tensei, with its early bosses, Minotaur and Medusa, and the way it handles its alignment representatives. But you don't need to play any other SMT games to enjoy its story. It returns to the law chaos alignment system, but it's worth noting that this game is followed by SMT4, Apocalypse, which assumes you take the neutral ending in SMT4.
True, the return to law chaos alignments is good, but due to bad decisions from the developers, getting the neutral ending in SMT4 is tricky, and you will likely need to consult a guide. It was poorly done because you have a forced +5 lawful point decision you're forced to make just before the alignment lock, meaning that you really need to be slightly more chaotic to get the route you actually want. You can actually be too neutral to get the neutral route, which is a huge oversight from the developers. Another takeaway is that you'll need to do side quests to complete the neutral ending, which requires returning to earlier areas of the game and doing a lot of odd jobs, though some of the dialogue and characters you meet are interesting.
You'll probably need to find an overworld map online because the overworld map in SMT4 is handled very poorly. It's basically all the major streets in Tokyo, but it's blocked with debris all over the place, meaning you'll often have to take a very roundabout approach to get to your destination.
Well, Sleepy Joe, that is actually somewhat true. The map is convoluted with debris over the place. It's not as good as my wall I built is. Despite this, there are teleport stations called terminals, but just like in SMT2, they're placed awkwardly sometimes. The way the world map was made still makes it very confusing and challenging to do the side quests.
So you hated the overworld too?
Well, to be fair, I didn't find it hard because I've walked around Tokyo before and I was good friends with Shinzo Abe before his untimely passing. I always take Millennia, my wife, not the Elden Ring boss, to Shinjuku so that she can get the latest fashion trends. Baron really enjoys going to the maid cafes, the computer shops in Akihabara.
Yeah, the cat-made cafes are pretty chill. I had Abby Sensei, rest in peace, show me around, and he got me the friends and family discount. They always call me Obama-chan. I always get the omu rice from them, and they even write my name with ketchup onto the omelette. It's so wholesome and relaxing. Hey Joe, you should play Necopara or Cat's Paradise. It's genuinely such a wholesome and fun game about a pastry chef with genetically engineered cat girls.
What on earth are you two talking about, man?
Back to SMT4. The game was also rushed out for a release date, and the endgame is poorly done as a result. The characters really change after a certain point in the game. You do get to see their transformations if you do the law and chaos routes, but on the neutral route, the characters really feel like a 180-degree turn. There should have been a story extra arc near the mid to end game.
Agreed. You can tell the developers really wanted to do more with the game, but just couldn't. There are exclusive side quests on the different alignment routes, and there are exclusive New Game Plus quests and demons, which are a positive to all replay value. The game has a great New Game Plus, with many features such as being able to carry over your demon compendium. The strangest thing, though, is that this game has better routes and route quests/demons than SMT5, which somehow has even less.
The only thing I really hated is how the fiend-type demons were handled in this game. Most of them have a 1/256 chance of spawning in an area, so unless you grind encounters or cheat, you won't be using them. I fought one, but I had to watch a movie on a second screen while trying to encounter one, which is no way to play a game.
Well, for once, I don't blame Sleepy Joe. The question is if the negatives outweigh the positives. This really is a great SMT title with a fleshed-out battle system. The game really gets going after a certain point. It does have many pacing issues, but it's a genuinely fun game, and the voice acting is extremely good nowadays. The exact same voice actors don't do anime games anymore. They cost millions and only voice act for AAA games and want to be in movies. That's why they replace the voice cast so much in later games, such as SMT5.
You make good points, Donald. I'll place it in A tier. Now for SMT4 Apocalypse.
Honestly, SMT4A has the pinnacle of SMT gameplay, before SMT5 at least. It smoothens out everything wrong with SMT4 and is extremely fair for the player. I've beaten it many times on the Apocalypse difficulty mode, and it was very fair but also still challenging in all the right places. The world map issues in SMT4 are fixed with the removal of debris, so you can travel between any cities very easily, and the teleportation terminal spots are placed better. The early game is not as grueling. There's a tough King Frost boss early on, but he's nowhere near as difficult as the Minotaur. Apocalypse is simply an overall better game. There are hundreds of demons, hundreds of skills, many equipment choices, many builds you can choose to do, etc.
I like how the alignment issue is fixed. Even if you're not of the correct alignment, you can still choose whichever route you want, but you'll get a big punishment if you do so. The going from light to dark punishment is infinitely worse. All my consumable items were permanently destroyed. Your partner in battle will also never use a skill that the enemy can absorb/repel/null, so you'll never get punished for something that is not your fault, unlike SMT4. Now you have many different partners to choose from too, leading to more customization for your build too, and your partners will grow over the course of the game, getting better skills. Each partner has their own build too, so you can choose if you want a healing partner, a buffing, debuffing partner, a partner who deals more damage to enemies, a partner who does insta-kill attacks to enemies, to name a few.
Yeah, I played SMT4 when Apocalypse released and purposely did the neutral route. This game is a sequel to SMT4, specifically for the neutral route in that game, so play through that first, otherwise the plot really won't make sense. I mean, it doesn't continue right after the story. It's more of a what-if story. Apocalypse takes place like 90% of the way into SMT4, right before the final bosses. This game really feels like everything the developers wanted to do but didn't have time to do in the original title. And this title expands SMT4's lore significantly.
There are a few criticisms I had with the game. The dungeons are mostly recycled from SMT4, so you may want to take a break if you're playing SMT4 and then SMT4A immediately afterwards, because it can get really repetitive, though the demon variety is a huge plus. The final dungeon in this title is downright horrible. It all looks the same, and you should just look up a map for it because it's essentially a giant teleporting maze.
Even you don't like the dungeons?
Well, just the final dungeon in Apocalypse, yes.
Donald's not exaggerating, it's just a poorly designed and insufferable final dungeon.
Yeah, I remember now. I quit that dungeon. The space background made me all dizzy, so I ended up just watching Buffmaster's ending videos.
You watched Buffmaster's videos instead of playing through to the ending? You missed the final boss, which was an amazing and hard fight testing everything you learned.
Anyways, I didn't like the characters, and the story is poorly told. The major characters and their dialogue also feel more persona-y than the old SMT characters in old games. The characters have such an upbeat tone for most of the game that really clashes with the Apocalypse setting they are supposed to be in. Compared to Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga, which have a more somber way of characters explaining the plot and a far darker atmosphere, the way the characters act in SMT4A is really odd in comparison.
Agreed. If someone tries to defend the SMT4A dialogue, you show Nozomi's dialogue and you tell people how they butchered her character from SMT4.
What's wrong, Nozomi's dialogue?
She says, "Home Slice just went banana cakes."
But that's cool and hip.
That's not hip, old man.
We're almost the same age.
Apparently the change in tone was made because of workplace politics between the old development team and its newer members who wanted to modernize the SMT series. Don't let that put you off, though. The gameplay is really great and makes up for it. The lore of Apocalypse is genuinely interesting, and the distinct factions trying to control Tokyo are also well created.
I really like the character of Akira, or Aquila. They're the same man. Basically, Tokyo has a slower time than Mikado. Like if you spend a year in Tokyo, then 20 years passes in Mikado. I don't know the exact conversation rate, I'm guessing. So there was a man called Akira who was born in Tokyo, who found the sky city of Mikado and helped their society, even becoming their king. His name was eventually mistranslated as King Aquila in Mikado. But it's so funny. And if you look at Mikado, it has similar names to the Tokyo streets. It's because Aquila named the towns in Mikado, and he took the names from Japanese streets and changed them up slightly. The lore in Apocalypse is very interesting.
The divine powers were pretty cool, too.
Yeah, they were actually called the Polytheistic Alliance in Japanese, which was an even more amazing name, but Divine Powers isn't half bad either. Each of them were pretty amazing, and the boss rushes were really fun, albeit challenging. I mean, maybe Maitreya was a bit weak, but Odin and Krishna are some of the most amazing villains, and they're fun to fight against. I like the original plot of Apocalypse compared to Walter and Jonathan, where they were pretty plain and just rehashes of law versus chaos alignments. I like how they're the bad ending routes in Apocalypse, and they're just stepping stones compared to the actual villains.
True, the developers really learned from their mistakes from the original SMT4. One thing I hated was the fiend bosses, a type of demons often found in SMT, were again not implemented well in this game. Will they ever implement fiends properly again? Not really in SMT5. They were made as paid DLC. The fiends are in an endgame dungeon called Twisted Tokyo, an extremely repetitive dungeon that, simply put, sucks all the fun out of the game. They can be a good challenge, and when recruited, provide some of the most powerful skills in the game, but they're very repetitive because of the terrible randomly generated dungeon you have to travel hundreds of floors through. It's a lot of potential that they squandered because the fiends are mine, as well as many others' favorite race of demons.
True. The DLCs for this game are also very underwhelming due to all having a small narrative scope. You think a DLC with all the previous SMT protagonists called the Diamond Realm DLC would be the most interesting thing ever, right? But most of the characters have throwaway one-liners and generic dialogue, though the super boss in the DLC is genuinely fun to fight.
The Mephisto and Cleopatra DLCs are all right because they each allow you to recruit a new powerful demon. But the stories in the DLC are pretty much throwaway garbage. I just can't defend it at all.
Still, the gameplay is really fun and addicting in spite of its flaws. Want to give it S tier?
Heck yes.
Yes, man.
S tier it is then. Finally, we rank SMT5.
I always thought that SMT4A was the pinnacle of SMT gameplay, but now SMT5 surpasses it, kind of. The gameplay and quality of life features in SMT5 is the best in the series. SMT5 isn't a bad starting point at all, but you need to remember that when you go to play other older SMT games afterwards, that the gameplay won't have as many quality of life improvements anymore.
The Etrian Odyssey director worked on this game, and it shows, and I mean this in a positive way. If you're familiar, Etrian Odyssey is a tricky dungeon crawler series on the 3DS and has amazing gameplay that rewards you for playing smart and synergizing your character builds. SMT5 is similar, and if you choose to play it on hard from the get-go, you'll get some of the most challenging but also fun gameplay in the entire series.
SMT5 got hard, though. I kept struggling on the Quebec Werewolf and Fionn McCool. Whose OC is that?
Hey man, don't diss Finn McCool. He's actually a deity in Norse folklore. There are so many bosses in SMT5 that are fun on its hard mode, but grueling too, and the game isn't pulling its punches. In SMT4, for example, the difficulty really drops after the early bosses such as Minotaur. In SMT4A, it's similar. The difficulty drops after King Frost and only increases for the final boss battle. But in SMT5, there's a lot of hard bosses throughout the game that made me think of new demons to fuse and strategies to counter them, just as you said with Lou Garou and Finn McCool.
Agreed, and the demon negotiation is improved even more from SMT4A, which already had really good demon negotiation. The lines of dialogue from the demons are even funnier than ever, and recruiting demons isn't hard at all compared to the old games. You can even get easier negotiations through using similar demons, like using a King Frost on a Jack Frost, and you don't even need the demon to be in your immediate party. It can be a demon carried around, and it'll still work, unlike old games where that doesn't work. This was a mechanic since Nocturne, but it was very obscure at the time, and they've added a lot more combinations now.
At the same time, there's a lower amount of demons in the game compared to old games. SMT5 has 221 compared to SMT4A's 400-plus demons. There's nothing the developers could have done about it since all the demons are now modeled in 3D, so of course it's going to have less than SMT4A, which had 2D demons only. Still, it was a mild disappointment, and a significant portion of the demons in SMT5 are recycled 3D models from Nocturne rather than new ones. The protagonist does have the most unique skills out of any SMT game, and you genuinely feel like a deity in this one.
Yeah, I did a magic build with the protagonist. He has so many unique signature skills compared to old protagonists. It's amazing, though his design is a bit odd.
Hey now, Joe, don't diss the protagonist's design, though. He's meant to be a deity, not a schoolboy protagonist. I agree they made it possible to make any build, though an almighty physical build trumps all.
My name is so good it's a verb.
The open world is fun, as to explore as well, with many optional side quests as well, but it can leave something to be desired. One criticism I have, though, is that there are barely any dungeons in the game. There's only 4. Not just that, I'd go as far as to say that only 2 of the 4 dungeons in the game are well designed, with the other 2 just being hallways with forced encounters. I miss getting quests from human NPCs too. The NPCs are mostly demons you get quests from not human NPCs.
I like the simplicity of the dungeons in SMT5.
But the later overworlds are dungeons. Look at the 3rd and 4th regions. The open world is actually very intricate with tunnels and side paths everywhere. I'd argue that the open world themselves are somewhat like dungeons with collectibles such as miracles, essences, money, and the hidden Miman.
I can't agree with you on that. In contrast to SMT4 and the older titles as well, SMT5 barely has any dungeons. Sure, the dungeons in SMT4 and SMT4A are very simple compared to Nocturne's dungeons, but at least they had dungeons. SMT5 barely has any dungeons. The open world structure of SMT5 is fun at first, but it can get boring after a while, and you should pace yourself, or else you can get burned out very easily.
Well, one thing I hate is the story.
Agreed. The story pacing of SMT5 is bad. In SMT5, you get the intro cutscenes, then you get to the first open-world desert. There is a boss and a 2-minute flashback scene, as well as 2-minute scenes of the Law and Chaos heroes sprinkled in, but for the most part, it takes easily 20 hours to finish that open-world area to get to the next major plot event that explains what happened. And although I hate to repeat it, I don't really like the school environment which is present in this game, unlike most other SMTs, which don't have schools except SMT, which actually made a good school environment that was under threat of demon attack.
That is true. I don't like agreeing with you, Bummer, but you're actually right. I can tell that SMT5 had a troubled development cycle from watching the news and then playing it. They had to develop for the Nintendo Switch that they had no experience with, and they also had to deal with the 2020 pandemic. I don't blame them, and I believe the developers worked very hard on this game. Following the game since it was announced, you can see the themes they described for the game are completely different than what they had planned, such as talking about how modern society is bad, tackling difficult issues such as joblessness, unemployment, etc.
Yeah, you'd know about unemployment. My unemployment rate during my term was higher than yours, Donald.
That's a bad thing. What on earth is wrong with you, Joe? It's like golf. You want a lower score.
Sorry, Sleepy Joe, Donald's right. You should have played Hot Shots Golf and the recent Everybody's Golf to teach you that.
Moving on, the pacing is so strange at times, and they'll put a lot of work on one story arc and then rush the next portion of the game. Why put so much detail into one of the side characters and then barely even show the characters on the cover of the game? I mean, there's only 2 scenes with the dog on the cover of the game. Heck, even watching the trailers for the game actually spoiled a lot of the story arcs. They used important cutscenes in the trailer because they had nothing else to show. They spoiled the entire Lamu plotline, for example.
Well, that's how SMT5 is. Amazing gameplay, albeit having barely any dungeons, but not such a great story. People poked fun at SMT4 and SMT4A's story, but they had much better pacing. Even SMT4, which had its long Mikado scenes, had better pacing than SMT4. I'm not joking. Even though SMT4's endgame was rushed, it was even better than SMT5's endgame, which is somehow even more rushed without spoiling anything. SMT5's endgame recycles its own content with just 1 or 2 throwaway alignment-specific endgame side quests, whereas SMT4 managed to actually have a lot of alignment-specific endgame quest lines and even new game plus content. I'd even say the lore of SMT4 and 4A's world is amazing as well.
Oh man, here we go again.
Yes, the character interactions in SMT4A were terrible with poorly localized dialogue, but you cannot deny the lore of the world involving 2 lands in different time periods was fascinating, and I really enjoyed the backstory of the countries, as well as Akira's backstory. You see people in the churches in Mikado tinkering with cars they got from Tokyo and trying to figure out how they work. It's so fascinating the attention they put into the world of the older games. In contrast, SMT5's characters are just so terribly done. They had a lot of scenes with the alignment representatives, but again, it's somehow so poorly paced with so many useless scenes not needed in the beginning, and then badly rushed scenes at the end. Like with Dazai, for example, he gets too many scenes, whereas the other alignment representatives don't get many scenes at all.
But the gameplay, Demon Fusion, making character builds is still amazing, huh?
Yeah, the gameplay makes up for it. I hate to say it, but SMT games, especially nowadays, are mostly for the gameplay.
Yeah, guys, I feel that although they went 1 step in the right direction, they went 2 steps backward at the same time. The game feels amazing to play at first, but it overstays its welcome and the endgame fizzles out. Sorry, I like to give fair criticism. I have to lay into them when there's so many significant faults with the game. You're right, though. The gameplay is one of a kind and makes up for it, so I'm putting it in S tier. I think we did an okay job with the tier list.
I don't know. It doesn't look so good. When can we do one for the SMT spinoffs?
We need to give Sleepy Joe some time to play through them.
What should I play next?
Well, you can choose the order depending on what you like. The original Devil Summoner and Soul Hackers follow from SMT, but have easier gameplay and more quality of life enhancements. Devil Survivor 1 and 2 are fun if you want a turn-based SRPG game with demons and great roots and endings. Meijin Tensei also did that, but it's really bad. Don't play that. Devil Summoner Redo is an action game spin-off. The first has few demons, but the second game is a lot better. Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2 are fun games where you actually play as humans that turn into demons. It was developed right after Nocturne and plays and looks like Nocturne, but with improvements. Devil Children or Demi Kids is a spin-off of SMT playing like Pokemon. The older games are very violent, but the games released later on tone it down and make it more kid-friendly. There's a bunch of Last Bible games. I'd recommend watching Marsh's videos on those. There's the old Megami Tensei games, too, if you're interested in seeing the origins of Megaten. But play the Kyoyaku remasters on the SNEs because of the quality of life improvements. Depending on what you call a spin-off, you can even play Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Catherine and Jack Brothers, or even, God forbid, Persona.
You don't like Persona?
Nah, I'm just joking. They're good. Definitely play Persona 1 and 2. 2 is split into 2 games as well. They have the best narratives out of all of the games. Persona 5 is so much fun because you fight directly with demons from Megaten, and you can recruit them directly. Play the spin-offs of Persona 2, including the Persona 4 Arena games and the Persona Dancing Rhythm games. Persona 5 Strikers follows Persona 5, but it was made before Persona 5 Royal, so it has some characters and plot lines missing, but it's still worth playing. Persona Q is really great, too. It's a dungeon crawler made by Etrian Odyssey. If you like Strange Journey, you'll like Persona Q, though it plays much more like Etrian Odyssey rather than a Megaten game.
Anyways, gentlemen, let's call it a day.
See ya.
Also, SMT Ronde is my favorite. Ha ha, joking. Take care, oh bummer and Sleepy Joe.